Morning. It's exactly 9 o'clock. We're going to start this morning's panel, The Rent's Too High, Finding Solutions. So welcome and thank you for joining us. This morning's panel is part of a 5-part series that the Housing Council is doing in conjunction with our celebration of 50 years of critical housing services to the Rochester community. Before we get started, make sure you're set up to be able to hear us. If you have any technical issues or questions connecting to us this morning, you can shoot a message into the chat or reach out to the Housing Council via email, and we would love to help you overcome any barriers you're having to today's program. A little background on the Housing Council. The Housing Council is celebrating 50 years of serving the greater Rochester community. Annually, we serve about 8,000 households trying to reach their housing goals, whether that be homeownership, creating a better tenancy experience, improving business practices of small business landlords, and assisting those who already own their home overcoming a financial or other type of challenge. We offer comprehensive assistance and training to landlords. We maintain a housing hotline. If you haven't used our hotline, we're available 9 to 1, Monday through Friday, to try to answer or direct you to the right resources for housing related issues. We also work very hard to promote fair housing awareness, to address discrimination in our community. And we publish a rental registry to assist those on a housing search. Today's panel is going to address affordable housing solutions in terms of the rental market. I will be moderating today's event. My name is Mary Leo. I am the Executive Director of the Housing Council at PathStone, and welcome you to today's panel. I hope you've been able to join one of our other panels over the last couple of weeks. And if you haven't already, please check out our website for more information about other ways we're celebrating our 50 years. So today we'll be talking about the current state of affordable rental housing in Monroe County, why it's important that we have it, and we have it in a variety of options, what potential solutions would be for folks trying to access affordable options, and how we can engage stakeholders in our work to improve affordable housing choices. I'm joined by 3 experts in this field. Mr. Eric VanDusen from the ESL Charitable Foundation. So Eric, we'll hear from you in just a minute. I'd also like to welcome Dr. Candice Lucas, the Chief Community Engagement Officer and lead staff with the RASE Commission from Monroe County, and our friend and alum, Bret Garwood, who is the CEO of Home Leasing. So thank you all for being with me today. I look forward to hearing from each of you. Eric, why don't you, before I move forward, I do just want to give a heads up on our upcoming discussions. Hopefully you're with us on the 23rd when we are addressing issues for first-time home buyers. This past week, we were talking with experts on overcoming barriers to housing for non-English speakers. And then we have one more event before our 50th anniversary celebration directed towards landlords. So please mark your calendars and register for those if you haven't done so already. So back to our panelists. I welcome you all. I appreciate you all being with us today. I've learned so much from each of you myself over the years. I'm just really excited for you to share your knowledge and expertise with our audience. I'd like to turn it over to Eric. If you could tell us a little bit more about yourself, what you've been busy doing lately, and how your work relates to affordable housing.
Absolutely. So thank you, Mary. My name is Eric VanDusen, as Mary mentioned, and I'm a Senior Relationship Manager with ESL Community Impact. And I focus on building strong neighborhoods. So that's the portfolio that I manage. All of our grant making and investments in that area would be part of my focus. And that includes affordable housing. And Mary, do you want me to go through the questions that
Yes,
you asked
so
of us? Okay.
I did, spoiler, I did prompt our panelists today to talk about some key areas that I know our audience is interested in. So we'd love to have you spend about 5 to 7 minutes talking about a few of the things our audience has been interested in.
Perfect. Yeah, and so ESL's mission focus is on supporting healthy, resilient, and an equitable Greater Rochester. And we support programs and efforts to expand opportunities for all residents in our region, focusing on 3 strategic areas. The first I mentioned is building strong neighborhoods, which includes affordable housing, expanding individual opportunities, which includes education and employment, and strengthening organizations and systems. And we invest in neighborhoods throughout Greater Rochester to ensure we are connected, inclusive, and affordable to a range of incomes and housing needs. We support organizations and initiatives by investing in system change that aligns with larger community goals and opportunities. We recently have had the opportunity to support a private sector rental study, which we're doing in conjunction with some community partners. And the reason for our interest in doing that is our community doesn't really have a regionally focused study that analyzes rental housing from a market perspective, better understand some of the barriers to not only affordability, but also to providing quality housing at the same time. And we as a community need to understand better how we can convert naturally occurring affordable units to permanent affordable units, working with the public sector. Not just looking at need, and that's important, but also looking at market dynamics and conditions to understand the barriers and opportunities that from that perspective, the goal of which would be to gain insight into approaches that can be more strategic and effective. The studies being funded by ESL, the Joseph Wilson Foundation, and the Rochester Area Foundation, and CZB is the consultant. So CZB did the housing market study for the city back in 2018. So they understand our markets and our neighborhoods, and they were a logical consultant to select for this, and they're leaders in these types of studies. And at this time, the study's still being formulated, so there aren't any recommendations to share as yet, but this will be completing in the near future, so stay tuned. What we're hoping is that from this study, it will include data to inform approaches when developing solutions to the region's affordable housing issues, and equally important, when determining affordable housing priorities. So we'll provide some data in addition to other sources of information for us as a community to better understand what some of the market dynamics are, and to develop strategies that more effectively align with some of those dynamics. And the importance of that is that the private sector is the largest supplier of affordable housing. So we're hoping that the study will help the community develop those approaches to converting naturally affordable housing to quality permanent affordable housing, working with the private sector. In addition to the other initiatives that are going on, working with affordable housing developers and other housing organizations, it's important that we find ways to be able to include the private sector in the affordable housing network to more effectively produce affordable units that are of quality. You know, and the reason why we're focusing in this way, and particularly on the small landlords, is because the small investors operating in weak markets are challenged the most of all landlord types, because they have less margin and equity to work with. And we're hoping that the community can use this information in discussions on housing instability and how system dysfunction contributes to affordability and quality issues for both tenants and landlords. Although poor behavior and bad business practices are real, dysfunctional housing systems contribute significantly to this. And understanding where this is so, why, and how will give the community an opportunity to create systematic change on a larger scale. In terms of what ESL's planning to do next with this study, really it isn't what ESL would do next, it's what the community will be discussing as they digest the study and its recommendations. And from that, what the housing organizations might come to ESL for consideration to leverage resources to implement solutions that are informed by the study, both in the form of current programs that are effective and could scale up, and as well with new initiatives. So, Mary, that's kind of my overview, and what I'll look forward to discussing more as this discussion continues.
Wonderful. Appreciate that very much. We're definitely going to do a deeper dive and kind of pick some of that apart later in the program. So thank you for that background information. I would like to invite Dr. Candice Lucas to tell us more about herself, her role in the community, and how her work relates to affordable housing solutions.
Thank you, Mary. Good morning, everyone. Candice Lucas with Monroe County. I am the Chief Community Engagement Officer. This is a newly created position that started last March 2020. And I will by no means call myself an expert in housing, but I'm really glad to be part of this panel just from the work that I've been able to do in the sector. Part of my role, since I started has been with the vaccine clinics and making sure that we had equitable distribution of vaccine throughout the community. And it's glaring the difference in how the COVID pandemic has impacted communities across Monroe County, especially in communities within the city of Rochester, especially low income or communities of color. And so when I think about housing, I really think about it as one of those social determinants that intersect with the other sectors of our lives, employment, health, education, etc. And so, what's important for me is that we not look at housing as a silo, but as part of the larger structure that impacts the day-to-day well-being of individuals. I also had the opportunity to be the lead staff member on the Commission on Racial and Structural Equity, which was established by Mayor Lovely Warren and County Executive Adam Bello last year in 2020. And the commission was set up to look at systems of inequity and where we could dismantle these structures. And there were 9 working groups, and one of those working groups was specifically on housing and looking at the structures that have the inequitable structures that have led to the current conditions that we experience in housing today. So those both, truly intersect. And finally, I'd just like to talk a little bit about the work that we are doing in our community development division at the county, because we had a wonderful project with PathStone earlier this year that I'll talk more about later on. As PathStone is developing a housing project, or was developing a housing project, and we wanted to look at how we could ensure information was distributed to all communities across the county, make sure that people were aware of the opportunities that they had for affordable housing, and how we could ensure that there was a diverse pool of applicants that were being selected for those projects. So housing really is, as I said before, it is one of the social determinants that impact where people live, work, play, worship every day. It impacts their health and well-being. And we want to see, from the county, as we're working to make sure that Monroe County is a much more equitable community, how housing fits into that, and what changes and enhancements we could make in those areas.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Look forward to more details on that project and your other work around equity. It's really key when we're talking about affordability. So now I'd like to turn it over to our friend Bret Garwood from Home Leasing, so he can talk to us a little bit about his role there and the mission of home leasing and some of the things he's been working on in this space more recently. So Bret.
Hi, thanks for having me. First, congratulations to the Housing Council for 50 years. I worked at the Housing Council, my first job out of college. It really provided my foundation in my housing work, and I got to work then with our panelist, Eric VanDusen, and a young guy named Alex Castro was hanging out there as well back in the day. So thank you so much for all the work. So I'm currently Chief Executive Officer for Home Leasing, and we are a development, construction, and property management company that focuses on affordable housing, headquartered here in Rochester, but we do a lot of work across the state. We are a for-profit company, but we are a family-owned company, and we're very mission-oriented. We are a certified B Corporation, which is a international designation for corporations that are using private capital to accomplish more than just profit, but to actually have an impact on the world. And we take that work very seriously. As a result, when we were trying to figure out what we want to do, the kind of projects that we want to work on, we always look to accomplish something more than just the creation or preservation of affordable housing. We want to be linked to a broader housing goal or goals, and usually that is a community development goal, so that we're doing something within the area that we are working in partnership with the community, the city or the town or the village that we're working in, and other housing and community development partners. This gets challenging, right? I think Rochester provides a pretty good example. In some ways, Rochester's affordable housing industry is, the most sophisticated and substantial in New York State, if not the country. We have a very long history of doing much more and much more innovative affordable housing work than almost any other city that I could think of. But it clearly isn't meeting the entire need, right? So that's the big challenge. The need to address the needs of for quality, safe housing and that's affordable is far greater than even a place like Rochester, who does so much good work, can handle. So that's the primary challenge. But also we have other complexities, our concentration of poverty, the very high poverty rate, the condition of our housing. So when we do projects, they encounter a number of challenges. First is complexity. It takes, frankly, too long and it's too hard to get a project done. We have to figure out ways as an industry to try to do things simply. And I'm really looking forward to the study and the work that ESL is doing to find ways to partner with privately owned entities and try to figure out a way to execute improvements to quality, naturally occurring housing that might be easier to do, right? Because the projects that we tend to work on take many years to get from idea to completion. The second issue is cost, right? This is the biggest burden I think that we have, is that the cost to create and to preserve quality, affordable housing is simply much more than the affordable rents we want to charge can bear to support. And that's where a bunch of programs come in, but it's also increasing, right? We're trying to do a lot with affordable housing. We're creating quality, but we're also trying to do green housing. We are trying to do workforce goals. These all are working to increase the costs, and that's a big concern that we have to work on. The scarcity of the resources is another issue. We have a lot of projects that are competing with a narrow amount of resources. And so there's a bit of a pileup of projects looking for funding. And I'm hoping that at the federal level, there'll be some additional resources. Even at the state level, there'll be some additional resources. I think it's notable that New York State has a 5-year housing plan that is in its last year. And next budget year, there'll be a lot of discussion about how to continue capital program to even increase beyond what currently happens in affordable housing across the state. And then finally, this is all linked. Another substantial challenge is we are, I think, generally good at developing a lot of affordable housing. Again, it doesn't meet the entirety need of low income households, but it's a real challenge to develop or create or maintain housing that's affordable to extremely low income households, people in deep poverty, because you simply can't manage a project, a building, a unit for rents that are as low as what people can only afford when they make $9 or $10 or $11 or $12,000 a year, which is not uncommon in the city, unfortunately. So that's a big challenge. But there are some new methods and strategies. You know, when we're looking to our projects, we're looking to do a diversity of projects. And a recent example, I think that is very high profile, is the work that we've done on the inner loop. Other developers have participated in that. People like PathStone, Krista, and Conifer, and all together, there's been a real variety of housing types created, and it's probably the most integrated neighborhood that exists because of the creation of all of those new units, and so we're quite proud of that. But that's high profile. Another type of work that we're doing is something that we need a lot of in this city, is that there's a certain amount of housing that is in extremely poor condition and often owned and managed by landlords who are just not up to the task, or who are explicitly not doing a good job in doing I'm being kind of nice, but are explicitly doing a bad job in dealing with their owning their housing. And so we've been working to identify some housing that is in real failure, and trying to work to acquire it, renovate it, and preserve it as permanent affordable housing. The first example of that was Thurston Village on Thurston Road, and now we're working on a portfolio of projects that are called Flower City Apartments, one on East Main, one on Culver, and one on North Clinton Avenue. You know, taken together, these are all 200 units that we've done this with, but it's extremely hard work, and we have to figure out a way as a city to make sure that we don't have to deal with as many projects like these that are a real crisis, right? We have to intercede when before it's a crisis and before it becomes extremely expensive and complex to deal with. We also are fortunate to partner with other affordable housing providers. I'm most proud of the work we've been doing with the Urban League. We manage their properties, and one of the things that they've done recently is a new rent-to-own program, lease to purchase. We call it L2P, and that opened on the southwest side of Rochester, where tenants will enjoy affordable rents. And then after a period of time of 15 years, the tenants that are there will be able to purchase those single family homes at very affordable rates and create home ownership and have equity in their homes. So they're also building wealth. We hope to repeat that project with them in the future. So there's a range of things. And then finally, developing housing, affordable housing in areas that it's been difficult or been exclusionary in the past. We've worked to find projects and complete projects, as other affordable housing developers have, you know, outside the city of Rochester, where we have housing opportunity projects where people have options to have housing choice and to move in areas that have higher quality schools and maybe amenities that they can't have, and make sure that we have housing choice in this. So that's kind of a very broad overview. As I mentioned, it's a partnership. We're not just building affordable housing, we'll own it for years. So the community support and participation is really key. We have to work with the communities that we will own properties in for basically ever. So I appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me.
Wonderful. Yes, exciting projects. I'm very inspired by so many of the projects and methods that you've been able to share with our community in the last couple of years. With that being said, I'd like to invite all the panelists to start to think about several questions that we've received from the community over the years, discussions that have been both being had by service providers, people who work professionally in the housing affordability space, but also things that community members have called in asking about through our hotline. So I'd like to take a few minutes to open up to the whole panel A couple of questions that we've been thinking about here. First and foremost, just to do some level setting, what do we mean by affordable housing? It's kind of a vague phrase, and I hear this question asked a lot. Is there a definition of affordable housing? And if there's not, how do you personally define it? So anybody have a strong opinion on the meaning of affordable housing?
Sure, I'll jump in to start. The definition of affordable housing that we use is HUD's definition, which is that a household doesn't pay more than 30% of their income on their housing costs. So that's the definition that in community impact, focusing on affordable housing, we use to determine whether the different proposals and requests that come to us meet affordability standards.
Great. So a person is not paying more than 30% of their gross monthly income to make their monthly housing payment. So that's a nice definition, a good place to start. Anybody have anything to add to what it means to provide affordable housing in a community?
Mary, I'll add to that, and I will agree that that is the calculation that's used, 30% of the income. But what I would, say is that affordable housing, it merely means that you live in a residence that you can afford to pay for, while also being able to maintain your other needs, like clothing and food and transportation, leisure, et cetera. And that is that's the issue that a lot of people have, is that sometimes because they're rent burdened and they're paying way too much on housing, they're not able to afford their other needs.
Great point.
And I agree with that. I think when we're talking about affordable housing, we're talking about making sure everybody can afford a quality place to live. But I think we also, I think that I've been having this conversation and asking this question for 30 years. And I think we can't expect that a definition for affordable housing will be simple, right? There's a lot of complexity in the world of affordable housing. The truth is that somebody who's very low income, if you are surviving on just Social Security or disability or part-time minimum wage work, when you're making $10,000 or $15,000, you can't really afford anything for housing, right? That's not enough to do everything besides housing. So it gets pretty tricky when we just put a percentage on. So we need to also be prepared as we talk about individual projects or community needs, that question has to get a little bit more complex, and we need to be open to really discussing what we need to accomplish in order to address the need.
Wonderful.
Yeah, and to add to that a little bit, I totally agree in what Bret just said in terms of affordability starts maybe with a calculation, but there's a lot of refinement and complexity around that. And as families and households have very low incomes, you can put that 30% calculation forward and say you can afford that, but in fact, at very low incomes, they can't, because it's just one crisis waiting to happen, and suddenly the rent isn't going to get paid, or something's going to, in their budget, it's going to unravel. And so I think that that's a really important point to make. And in fact, the city's housing study documented that the affordable housing issue, it is very complex, and it's as much to do with the number of households we have that have very low incomes as it is with the rents themselves. So when you have a large number of households who can't afford any rent, it doesn't matter what the rent is.
And if I can just add and make that really real for individuals, when we work with people through our Department of Human Services and DHS, and they're receiving a grant for public assistance, a single person, the grant amount is $494. Now, if we talked about 30% of that for housing, 30% of that is $148. What housing is someone going to find for $148 a month? And think about even for $494 a month, right? What type of quality housing will they find for that? So a single person getting assistance at $494, if they find housing at $600 a month, they're already in the hole. And then you have to tack on utilities, you tack on food, you tack on clothing, right? Childcare. People are starting backwards. So we really have to think about, that percentage. It's a good start, but we have to, to Bret's point, really think about all of the everything else that goes into that as well.
So true. I mean, and we're not talking about a small group of people. According to the study from ACT Rochester, 55% of Rochesterians are rent burdened, meaning that they are paying more than 30% of their income, of their gross monthly income on rent. So any suggestions or thoughts or strategies on what we can do to help support or correct that trend of 55% of our Rochesterians from having to pay more than 30% of their income on their housing payment?
Well, I'll jump in and say that, one of the themes folks are hearing is that affordable housing is very complex. And I think that as part of that complexity, we as a community are better understanding that this is a cross-sector issue. It isn't just about affordable housing and focusing on affordable housing approaches. We also need to include things like employment and access to jobs, and not just jobs, but livable wage jobs. Because ultimately, if you had a magic wand, you could solve the affordable housing crisis that we have in Rochester by ensuring that all households have livable wage jobs. So it's going to be a combination of things because it is complex, but I think part of it is that the conversation needs to expand and be cross-sector in recognition of that complexity.
All right, thank you so much for making that point. Again, I strongly believe in that. As I said, it's one of the social determinants, and these things all act in concert with each other. The RASE report, which focused on dismantling these structures of inequity, had a working group solely focused on housing, and there were a number of recommendations that came out of that report around housing that we need to look at. And some of them talked about making investments in the community to counteract the legacy of redlining that really has led to the segregation and concentration of poverty that we experience today. And so through the county's community development division, where we're trying to use our influence to encourage developers to build affordable housing for families countywide. The plan, we're hoping will focus on key transit routes as well, because transportation is so important to make it easier for people to access jobs. And we also want to ensure that affordable housing is not concentrated or clustered in certain communities. And to make sure that there's inclusionary zoning that requires a certain percentage of new market rate developments to include affordable housing. Through our DHS office, we're also exploring the use of using supplements to increase allowances so that people can afford better housing. I just gave you, the real numbers on how much a single person could pay if they were getting public assistance. So we want to be able to increase that amount. But if we're giving landlords more money, we also want to make sure that they're using those dollars to repair and fix up their homes. Because to Bret's point, there are some homes that are in need of some help. And we want to make sure that those things are happening.
Great. I would love to hear, Bret, your thoughts on this topic, but I do want to take that point and kind of transition into the other side of affordability, which is also quality and safety has been brought up. I know you have a lot of experience in seeing properties that are not safe or of quality or being properly managed. So do you have any particular comments on ways that we can afford both the price, but also the quality and the safety of units that are affordable to our lowest income neighbors.
Yeah, I guess one of the points that I'd emphasize gets to that topic, right? We are also trying to improve the quality of life, right? And the biggest problem I think we have for quality of life in Rochester is the quality of the housing. And we have huge portions of our city that have experienced disinvestment for a lot of the reasons that Dr. Lucas mentioned, redlining and other things, but it's also market failure, right? We've got 100,000 fewer people in the city of Rochester than we once had, and that created a lot of vacant units. And it's left many communities with failed rental markets. Much of the condition, some of the condition that our units can that our units are in bad condition can be blamed on the landlord, right? There are clearly bad actors, but the vast majority of the condition of our units is really because the markets have completely failed because of this long history of disinvestment. And we have to figure out a way to make those communities vital again and improve the conditions. And you simply can't do that on the backs of rents that are $400 or $500 or $600. So we have to accomplish two things that in some ways work against each other, right? Improve the quality of the housing by inducing more capital, which wants to have higher rents, but we don't want higher rents because we have very low income people. So I do think that the only way to do this broadly and accomplish it, holistically, is this combination of work that we've talked about, more affordable housing and more capital. But I also think at the federal level, the only way to really solve this problem is that we need a rental assistance program that reaches way more people than the current rental assistance programs do. You just simply can't accomplish quality, affordable housing for tens of thousands of more people in Rochester by just building housing and keeping the rents as low as they are. It won't work in the long run. So I think that it all points to broad federal action, because the federal government's the only entity that has the scale of resources that could handle something like this. It can't be done by the city or the county or the state. They don't have the scale of resources that are required.
Very true. I'd like to transition slightly back to a pilot program that Dr. Lucas had mentioned during her introduction. We were lucky enough here at the Housing Council and our family at PathStone to have kind of a three-way partnership with Dr. Lucas and her team at the county to drill down into accessibility of housing and making sure as new affordable units come online that everyone in our community, especially those most impacted or disproportionately impacted by historic disinvestment, high rates of poverty, people of color, people with limited English proficiency, have the same level of awareness and access to new units as they come online. So we tested this theory out with PathStone's new senior housing complex in the town of Irondequoit, Skyview Park Apartments. And part of that project was conducting a brief, simple survey to those in need or searching for affordable housing. And we asked them, what have been your largest barriers to finding something you can afford that's a good fit for your family? And of course, after expense, the number one concern was just knowing what options are. Like, how do I find something that's going to work for me? Bret, you had mentioned that we have a pretty sophisticated housing system in Rochester. Maybe we do have a lot of options that other communities don't have, but we definitely get the message from our program participants that they just don't know how to navigate it. They're not sure what's available. So Dr. Lucas, could you maybe talk in your experience or what you know from your level of work on this issue, how does access and equity impact people's ability to get into something that's affordable for them?
Yeah, Mary, thanks for raising this, because that, the project that we just did, it was, I thought, very innovative, and it was, specifically created to reach low income communities of color, residents in the city of Rochester and across Monroe County, to ensure that there was more diversity achieved throughout the process, and to ensure that people knew about where these housing projects were and were able to apply, understood the application process, and ultimately would be selected for one of the units. And one of the misconceptions that we hear about people seeking affordable housing is that they live in these communities because they want to live there. They don't have any aspirations for anything else. They don't want to leave their communities. And what we uncovered is that that simply was not the case. Most people just did not know where the opportunities were, or that there were opportunities available for them. Additionally, there was thinking that if Section 8 was not attached to it, that it wasn't public housing. And we understand that that's another misconception as well. Just as we talked earlier, the definition of what public housing is, affordable housing is, people did not understand. And so it was synonymous with public housing, and they didn't believe that this was for them. So being able to reach these individuals where they were, work through church groups, work through neighborhood groups, just get right down to the grassroots and interact with people in a way that was relevant to them. We saw just a great increase in the number of people that applied. And so what we found was that of the over 300 applications that were received, 43% of those individuals identified as Black or African American, and 45% lived within the city of Rochester. And so what this tells us is that when we reach people in ways that are accessible to them, meaningful to them, relevant to them, that they respond. One size does not fit all when it comes to marketing and communication about these projects. And we also need a centralized system to doing that, because people don't know where to look. And so if we're truly interested in diversity and equity in the market, then we have to find diverse and equitable ways to market the product to people and to reach them in a variety of ways.
Thank you. Any other thoughts?
I really appreciate those thoughts and remarks and the pilot that was done, and totally agree that coordination of information is really important. There's a lot of it, right? So we have resources, maybe not enough, but we do have resources. And I think some of the work that system integration is doing out of the United Way is particularly promising. They did a eviction pilot, getting ahead of the moratorium and issues that were going on in the community, as we all know, around tenants' ability to pay rent and landlords not getting rent. They built an integrated system connecting all of the resources related to rent relief, working on the same platform and producing front doors. So an individual can contact 211, and through 211 can be sent to where those resources are live, meaning if one organization has run out of rent relief, they'll know that and be able to send tenants to those organizations that have those resources. And then behind that, with the platform, these different organizations working with tenant households are connected to be able to wrap additional services around them to further stabilize their situation. So I think those types of approaches are also an important part of this, bring both integrated, collaborative approaches, so that even if you're not working in the field of housing, you'll know about housing resources in a way that's more accessible and readily available than currently is the case.
Wonderful. Okay, I do want to remind the audience that we will allow for time for questions from them. So please chat us your questions. Giselle, our lovely co-host, will be monitoring the chat. I do have one final question for the group. And I was wondering what your opinion is on how local government can be supporting rental projects or local stakeholders. Maybe it's broader than just government. What can we do as a community to make sure our voice is heard in that conversation and that our local stakeholders know that this is something we want for our community? Where are options, where are platforms?
I guess I'll start. I mean, I think first, there is a lot of good history to build on with local government participation and cooperation, especially at the city and at the county with affordable housing development. But we have to broaden the support by local governments for affordable housing, specifically in the suburbs. I think I've seen some, I definitely have seen some increased discussion in suburban communities of asking for, hey, we don't have affordable housing here. Clearly, what's happened in our community over the last couple of years has raised equity issues to a much more public discussion. And you've seen some of those discussions translate into suburban communities about why aren't we diverse, and try to face some of those reasons. But they have to face them in a much more serious way, where each community says, we need to be available for the creation of multifamily housing and multifamily affordable housing. And there's a lot of work to do there, because there's huge portions of our community that it's just very difficult to develop any rental housing, let alone affordable rental housing. So I think that's the focus on the local government point of view. But I also see some real promising additional resources coming through the stimulus funding that's going through the city and the county. There's lots of discussions, and it seems clear that housing will be a priority. It's all about working together, but it's also about everybody taking some individual responsibility for what's happened in their community and the lack of diversity that they have to recognize and do something about.
Yeah, I'll say I absolutely agree with Bret. I think we also have to help people understand, and I'll just say this again, but housing does not exist in a vacuum, right? And I think we're all clear on that. It's part of the social determinants, and it's so connected to, transportation, education, employment, health, all of these sectors. But I want to make it clear that this didn't happen by happenstance, right? It wasn't just something that materialized, but it was intentionally designed. And so we have to acknowledge that. In my mind, this was designed through the federal government and our banking systems and what we now term as redlining. And so therefore we have to be intentional about counteracting what has happened. We have to raise our voices as community members and demand equity in housing. But we also have to fight against the phenomenon of NIMBYism, right? Not in my backyard. There are so many misconceptions about what affordable housing means. And to many people, that means that, we're bringing poor, people of color into their communities. They're going to increase the crime rates. They're not going to take care of their properties, and they're ultimately going to bring the property value down. And we have to face that head on. That is not true. Any one of us at some point in our lives could need assistance. And affordable housing should not be a bad word, right? There shouldn't be anything wrong with saying we want people to be able to afford the housing that they live in. So I just think we have to raise our voices and talk about that. Although Monroe County, as a governmental entity, doesn't have authority over zoning or land use, as Bret just talked about, but various, our towns and our village local governments could support affordable housing projects by expanding zoning laws, enforcing code violations, when landlords are not maintaining their properties, and also enforcing the current anti-discrimination laws that exist. So those are some things that I think we can do immediately, as well as looking for more investment from the federal government.
And I would add that to everything that's been said, that we need to think regionally, that these issues are regional. They play out through local dynamics that may be different for all the reasons that we've been having conversation around. But it's understanding the regional context for all of that happening. And that's going to require cooperation on all levels, including county, city cooperation, because the city can't solve all of these issues on its own. The county won't be able to solve all of those issues on their own. It needs to be a regional perspective, not only with government, but I think for all of us who are working in this arena and neighborhood groups and others. So it is complex, but understanding the dynamics and how they play out locally, I think ultimately requires a regional perspective.
Thank you for that. Yep, we did receive a couple of questions from the audience. One is related to a theme of today's discussion, that we can't rely on the traditional economic system. What many of us can afford in rent is not going to support the costs associated with housing. So the person who submitted their question or their comment is just reinforcing the fact that there's going to have to be some government solutions to assist people in supporting their need for safe, affordable housing, that profit-driven solutions are not going to be sufficient. So I do appreciate that point. If anybody wants to address that any further.
Sure, I would. There are a lot of different housing providers. And in the affordable housing industry, the regulated affordable housing industry, there's kind of broadly three types of providers: nonprofit, for-profit, like Home Leasing is a for-profit, PathStone is a non-for-profit, and public housing, like Rochester Housing Authority. They each play a role in solving this, and there's different mechanisms to help, right? There are things that for-profit companies can do that nonprofit companies can't do. We have an increased tolerance for risk, and we often take on projects that nonprofits couldn't do. So there is certainly a role for for-profit. Also, there's financing mechanisms that make the difference between a nonprofit housing provider and a for-profit housing provider not that much different economically, or in terms of the impact on, in terms of the quality and the situation of the housing. The economics aren't actually that different. So I think it's not an either or. You kind of need a variety of solutions, and you have to be prepared for long-term stability. The benefits of the way that much affordable housing is built now is that it's not reliant on an annual capital or operating subsidy from the government, which means that it's sustainable despite the federal politics. And that's important because we do have a history across this country of public housing that suffered as the politics changed from one administration to the next. So anyway, there's a lot of different tools that we need. It's not an either or, and I guess obviously I believe that for-profits have a role, but not an entirety of a role. There's a need for different types of agencies and organizations doing things differently.
And one other more simple question, which I appreciate from the audience, they're excited about the L2P program, the lease to purchase. Ownership opportunities are also important for low-income individuals. So I believe that you reach out to Urban League. Is that correct, Bret? If you're interested in more details about this opportunity?
Yeah. Home Leasing is the property manager. So I'll put in the chat a link to the website where you can find more information on the project.
Wonderful, thank you. So we are coming to the end of the hour. I think I've realized we're just scratching the surface on this topic. There's a lot to digest here, so I appreciate everybody's input. I do want to plug our upcoming panel. on October 5th. It's going to be the last in this series. It's been a fantastic series. We're going to kind of talk on a little bit more detail on the other half of this conversation, why it's been a challenge to be a landlord. Eric, we're so excited about the data that's going to come out of the ESL study. So we have some real figures and numbers and hard facts to kind of understand the complexity in the private market. If you are a private housing provider, or you have questions about how landlords have been operating the last couple of years and resources for them, please join us on the 5th. It'll be the last of our 5 conversations in celebration of our 50 years, leading up to our main event, Community Starts at Home, where we will be celebrating virtually. We have a keynote speaker, Diane Yento, will be giving out Housing Hero Awards. Our hour-long virtual celebration will be followed by an in-person happy hour at 3 Heads for those with a VIP ticket. So please check out our website, thehousingcouncil.org/50 years for more information. I appreciate all of you joining us today. If you have additional questions, concerns, need resources in your search for affordable housing for yourself or somebody maybe you're working with, please reach out to the Housing Council. We do offer a lot of free resources on our website, thehousingcouncil.org. We do provide all of our services both in English and in Spanish, and we also provide interpretation services free of charge to anybody. So please connect with us if you want to continue this discussion or you're in need of resources to find your own affordable housing solution. And we hope you join us for our 50-year celebration. I want to thank our panelists. They did a fantastic job. I would love to invite them back at another time so we can continue this conversation. If you joined us late, we did record this. It will be available on our YouTube page along with our other discussions. And I think we just have maybe a minute or 2 left. If anybody has some final thoughts, or if each of the panelists can share with the audience where they connect with your upcoming work or resources that you think are available through your organization.
Well, I'll just say quickly, as I mentioned, the RASE report and the recommendations, the RASE website is available. I would encourage people to review the report. There is something in there for everyone, because those recommendations need all hands to help lift them. So I'd encourage you to look at the report and identify ways that you could help make some of the recommendations happen. It's at rockraise.com, and I'll put that in the chat box.
No, just thank you so much for hosting, and I'm happy to talk more.
Thank you, Mary. Appreciate it. And looking forward to a community conversation around the rental study once it's been completed.
We are very hungry for it. I've heard from lots of people. There's a lot of buzz around it. So thank you all so much. Again, thank you all of you who made time for us this morning. We look forward to celebrating with you on October 6th. Please reach out if you have questions related to this conversation or any of the others we've been having over the last couple of weeks. It's been a really exciting time for us, and we appreciate the community's feedback and participation. I think we're coming up with a lot of great solutions, and it's going to take all of our part to keep this ball moving forward. So thank you, everyone. Have a great morning, and we'll see you on the 6th.